"Thank you for your service," is a statement my husband often gets when we're out and about in town. But something tells me they forgot about someone. Me. Today I'm going to share a little bit about the history of women in the Air Force, my mother's experiences as a female Marine, and my own experiences with people assuming that I'm a spouse and not active duty military myself. But in order to know where we're going, we have to know where we've come from. It wasn't until September 1942, during World War II, that the Army Air Forces, AAF, was assigned its first women. These women came from the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the WAAC, and worked in the Aircraft and Warning Service. They initially started with 6,000 women that operated listening posts when enemy attacks were expected. These women were so successful, the AAF asked for 500,000 more. But a command prejudice was extremely significant against these female soldiers. So in 1943, the WAAC lost its auxiliary status and became the Women's Army Corps, WAC. At its peak, the WAC had over 32,000 members in 1945. These were all women. It had over 200 different specialties filled by enlisted women, and officers held 60 different specialties. After the war, most air WACs were discharged, and none were transferred to the Air Force when it became its own branch in 1947. But then, Congress established the Women in the Air Force, WAF, in June of 1948. It was limited to 300 officers and 4,000 enlisted women. But it wasn't until 1976 women were accepted into the service and the separate status of the WAF was established. My mother was one of those women who took advantage of this right and joined the Marine Corps as soon as she graduated high school in 1983. My mother even went so far as to skip her high school graduation and left for the United States Marine Corps instead. My mom worked personnel in the Corps. She even made it to E5 and NCO, which is a huge deal amongst Marines, and still is. She served 8 years before being forced to medically retire in 1991. I'm sure my mom would still be a Marine to this day if they would have let her stay. But it wasn't until I was older that she chose to share her own experiences with me. As a female Marine, she was told by her immediate supervisor if she wanted a good performance report, she had to do something sexual for him. I guess that goes back to Congress not really respecting women as a soldier. And she even attempted to go to her first sergeant when my father, also a Marine, was caught cheating on her by her. She was told to just simply get over it. Obviously, women didn't get much respect or credit back then. So why don't I tell you a little bit about me and my experiences? I joined the Air Force in November of 2006. I always knew I wanted to marry a man in the military. So I met and married my husband in Okinawa, Japan at my first duty station in November of 2007. We went back to the States for the first time in June of 2008. We obviously had to go through customs and didn't have passports, so we used our military IDs and leave orders. Well, the man at customs thanked my husband for his service and welcomed him home, but didn't really say too much to me. Also, while we were visiting, we were around town, and people would have conversations with my husband about his military service. We weren't in uniform, but they never said anything to me. And recently, we've met quite a few new couples at our second duty station. Most of them are made up of a male active duty member and a civilian spouse. Most of the spouses I've met have just assumed that I was a spouse too, and are quite surprised when they see me in uniform. I think it's quite funny. But even more recently, I had a friend from back home say to me in response to a comment I made on Facebook, "Oh, it must be hard being a military spouse." I simply let it go and didn't say anything. But needless to say, I joined the military before my husband, have always outranked him and still do, and I make it my personal goal to always outrank him. Yet it is still assumed that I am just a spouse. Ultimately, all I ask is that my military service be recognized like my husband's is. I told you a little bit about women's history in the Air Force, the stories my mother has shared with me about being a female Marine, and my own experiences with people assuming that I'm a spouse and not active duty military myself. It's okay though. I know I'm military.